Too late.
Okay. The meeting has been called to order. Before I start the meeting, I just want to mention what an amazing event was today for the McIlvaine Plaza, honoring Mary and George McIlvaine. It was amazing. And those people are loved, and their whole family was here. So some of us were here today. Thank you so much. Now we'll have approval of the minutes from September 20th. May I have a motion?
I'll move approval of the September 20 board meeting minutes.
Second?
I'll second.
That was Jess. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Reports to the board. Neither Rhonda nor Nate have reports, so neither one of them are here this evening. President's report, Dr. Schaefer.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. Good evening. I want to cover a few things under my report, three that are on there and one that I want to add. The first is just a quick update from the activities that some of us participated in last week. It was a full week with the WACCT, the Trustees Association event in Casper, followed by a commission meeting in Sheridan. And we had meetings with the presidents and Dr. Nichols, and the presidents had a meeting with the executive committee for the WACCT. So really a full slate. I will let the trustees that were there report on the WACCT sessions later on in your agenda, but I did want to talk about a couple of things specifically pertaining to the commission meeting on Friday. And the first thing is we had two items that were before them for approval. We had to bring back the fine art or the recreation athletics complex and our student housing project for approval because of the increased scope. And without going into a lot of detail, statute requires us to seek commission approval when the scope and cost of the project exceeds 10% of what it's been previously authorized for. And in both of these cases, the scope and the size changed over that time, which required that we go back to the commission for their approval for the increased authorization. And I'm pleased to announce that they approved that unanimously. And so both those projects are now approved at the levels that you will consider for the final level 2 on the rack later on this evening, and then we'll consider in the level 1 when we get an update on the level 1, level 2 plan from our good folks at Method. So that's, I think, one of the bigger pieces with that meeting. The commission did approve other rules, and I'm going to let Vice President Hay talk a little bit about those later in a second. And we also had some conversations pertaining to some discussion that we had the day before with the presidents and the president of the University of Wyoming. So we met, I think this is our third, what is being called the President's Summit. So the community college presidents sit down with Dr. Lori Nichols, the president of UW, to work through a variety of partnership related issues. One of the issues that we tackled during this meeting was the determination of whether or not we would support Wyoming setting an educational attainment goal. So the Lumina Foundation really has been the major push behind this so-called call it the completion agenda. Early on, it was part of their productivity agenda, but what they called their big goal 2020, which was to see 60% of the adult population in the United States holding some type of valuable post-secondary credential. Later on, President Obama then came out with a very similar goal of having 60% by 2025. But at the heart of these goals was Lumina's work to get each state to essentially establish what they call an attainment goal. That would say, as a state, we want to increase educational attainment to some threshold by some date. Just a handful of states still do not have a goal. Wyoming is one of those, and so Lumina has been working with us to discuss setting a goal. Long story short, when we left that meeting, we had a rough draft resolution that would suggest that the community colleges and the university would support setting an educational attainment goal for the state of Wyoming that would target having 60% of our adults with a post-secondary credential by 2020 and 75% by 2040. with that. So both the doable short-term goal and what we see as a real stretch long-term goal. To put it into perspective, right now, Wyoming is about identical with the national average in terms of the adult population with a post-secondary credential. I want to say it's about 48.5%, 46% for both. We're right on track. We had a lot of conversation though about, well, what about the type of goal are we shooting for? So, you know, interestingly, Wyoming has one of the largest portions of adults with some college or an associate degree. In fact, we rank first or second in the nation. We dropped to 41st in the nation when we look at the percent of our adults with a bachelor's degree or higher. We decided not to get into the details of credential targeting and all that wonderful stuff, but we do believe that some of that is going to come out in the future. So that draft resolution went forward to the Community College Commission on Friday. They ended up essentially supporting it in concept, and once it's finalized, I believe that they have authorized their chair to sign off on that resolution to set the attainment goal. Playing this downstream, sort of the process we anticipate is that it'll go to the UW trustees. If they endorse the goal, then ultimately it'll be advanced to the governor, and he'll be asked to do a proclamation establishing an attainment goal for Wyoming. There has been some discussion about what's the difference between an educational attainment goal and our completion goals. If you recall, you as did the other 6 boards of trustees and community college set a goal a few years back to increase credentials 5% each year through 2022. Think of that as a production goal. An attainment goal is something more that looks at a snapshot of the population to figure out where they attain. So right now we're focusing on getting more students to cross the stage during graduation and earning a degree or certificate. Attainment can be accomplished in a variety of ways. Some may be an increased production of college graduates. It may also include an increased focus on bringing college-educated folks to Wyoming. And so there's much broader strategy and applicability for an attainment goal than what there might be for the completion goal. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. So it allows many groups to perhaps focus on attainment versus with the, as higher education really focusing on the completion piece of that process. So we'll see where it goes from there, but I thought that was probably one of the things that was most noteworthy from those meetings. The other thing we discussed with President Nichols was a draft report that'll ultimately go to the legislature. I think I've mentioned this in the past, but there was a legislative footnote in the budget bill last session. I believe it was predominantly driven by the Speaker of the House that essentially charged UW and the community colleges in developing a plan that included strategies for the recruitment and retention of more in-state students into Wyoming's higher ed, as well as students from our proximate neighbors, the Colorado, the Nebraskas, and to report back to the legislature the specific strategies or things that we would attempt to do to achieve those retention and recruitment goals, and then any budgetary impacts with that. That report is due, well, Trustee Ketchum, you might know, but I think it's due the 1st of December back to both the Joint Education Committee as well as the Joint Appropriations Committee. We reviewed a draft of that report that sort of identified a handful of initiatives we may work on. And as soon as we get it to the next stage, I'll probably come back to you and give you a more formal briefing on what that report is looking like. But it's moving in the right direction and really nothing earth-shattering. It's talking about everything from easing the transition into college for Wyoming students, creating a college-going culture, to using financial discounting and other financial strategies to encourage non-residents to come to Wyoming, to creating pipelines back for adult students who maybe have some college but no degree. So really running a gamut of different strategies. And like I said, when that gets finalized, I'll bring it back and we'll kind of walk through that with you so you're aware of it, especially before it goes to the legislative session. No.
Yes.
Joe, who's putting that report together? If it's not the president's or the community college.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Trustee Cato. The footnotes actually says UW on behalf of UW and the community colleges will prepare that report and submit it to this. It was this concept was actually part of a bill that was moving through the session originally, the supplemental session, and it did not make it through the process. And so I believe the speaker took the route of a budget footnote to still get the same push, you know, in asking higher education to develop something like that. But the footnote specifically charges UW with creating that report and submitting that report on behalf of all of us. Yeah. Interesting. I will say in UW's, from our perspective, UW has been wonderfully engaging in trying to get us involved. The young lady they have working on this report is doing a very good job of trying to capture unique perspectives across the 8 presidents and put that into a report. So I appreciate the fact that they are actually doing the heavy lifting on this one.
Thank you.
And then I wanted Vice President Hay. Did you have a question, Jess?
No, just
Oh.
first.
No. Okay. Yeah, I thought it was close.
Before, excuse me, Madam Chair,
Sure.
before you get over to Julie, on the resolution, the attainment resolution, 60% with credentials, and you indicated that the flow of this movement for approval would be going to the governor, the trustees at the University of Wyoming. What about the college trustees?
Madam Chair, Trustee Erickson, that's a good question. There was a lot of debate about who should sign, who should review, who should agree, what should we do specifically with this. Based on the advice of the lady who's advising us from Lumina, they suggest most of these are set in the state in one of 3 ways, let me say. One is legislation. The legislature will actually create a bill that would set the attainment goal for that. Another is an executive order by the governor of the state. And the more common one is a joint resolution between the higher education systems or system in the state. And in the end, what she advised was that was the Wyoming Community College Commission and the UW Board of Trustees for simplest purpose. Now, what we've talked about is after that resolution is finalized and we get an indication that both have agreed and the commission has, should the trustees of each college go back and then ratify it or endorse it or pass their own proclamation. I think that's still up, and what the presidents have kind of agreed to do is see what the tenor of their trustees were, you know, in general to the concept. But I think for expediency and really for clarity and alignment with what other states have done, they recommended using the commission and the UW Board of Trustees. But love to hear your feedback. And
Well, Madam Chair, yeah, I do have a bit of a concern. And it goes back to the production 5% that we all agreed on 3 years ago. And that appears like it needs to be revisited. It's somewhat unrealistic at this point. And that leads me to wonder if 60% of the working population having degrees or certificates by 2025 is achievable. And it just seems to me that that's a pretty, going from 46% to 60% in just 8 years. That's a pretty hefty jump. So that's immediate feedback from one trustee.
Appreciate that. You know, and interestingly, I think most people felt fairly comfortable with the 60% by 2025. I got that wrong. It's 2025 and 2040. So we've got, you know, about 7 years. But the reality is I think we've only increased attainment by less than 10% over the past 10 years. And so, you know, it's a stretch for us, but, you know, folks felt confident that that's probably where we want to be in alignment with others. I don't know how realistic, but gives us a goal to work towards. And certainly I would be open to revisiting and talking about the completion goal as well. Although I think that is achievable, even though we've dipped off here in the last couple of years. There's still some strategies that should help us move.
But you're the eternal optimist.
That's true. I am, aren't I?
That's good. It's just, I think that we should be revisiting that the production goal as you define it. Because 5% over a 10-year period, Mr. Statistician, that's huge. You know, that's big time doubling.
Yeah, it's significant. Well, and Madam Chair, if Trustee Erickson, if I may be so bold, that would probably best be originated by the WACT board, the Trustees Association, to say if that's something we want to do and agree. We agreed to that goal as a seven institutions. Revisiting that as 7 institutions would probably be a welcome message or a fair message from the WACT board.
Mm-hmm.
That's not a passing the buck. Although I think we'd be more than happy to address it.
Well, I think it's a good goal. I think we need to have goals. So
I agree. Thank you. Yeah. I did ask Vice President Hay to prepare a brief summary in regard to some of the rule changes that the commission approved on Friday and some of the other conversations that are occurring amongst right now predominantly the student services VPs, but will have an impact on things in terms of how we look at admissions processes for students, establishing residency. And so I know Judy put together a document that's attached in your materials, but I also asked her just to take some time and walk you through that because I think these are important changes and important concepts that you should be aware of. So thank you, Judy.
is it a paper copy or is it on the laptops?
It's attached in your agenda,
It's on.
and it's
in the computer.
residency changes.
It's on the computer.
Oh, there it is.
Okay, thank you. So, Madam Chair and Board of Trustees, thank you for this opportunity to talk about this. This is an interesting journey that we've been on as the one-page document that I gave you references several years ago. I think it was early in my time here in Wyoming. Our residency policy said some stuff in it and it was the rules at the commission office level, and it had some language in it, and it also pointed to UW's UNIREGs, the University Regulations 8.1 or 8-1. And so over time there were some conflicts there, so we couldn't both point at UNIREG 8.1 and have the language we had in our rules. So the commission staff was tasked with slimming down the rules and only having the rules that we really needed. And so that residency rule was slimmed down to very little language and just pointing at the UNIREG. So that felt like the right thing to do because we thought residency should be consistent in the state. Because there's also a sentence in the rules that say that if you're deemed a resident at one institution in the state, you're a resident at all institutions. We'll honor each other's residency decisions. So that was fine for about a year. And then leadership changed at UW, and there were some changes quite often over the year in the UNIREGs for residency. And so that made it very difficult for us to follow because at the community colleges, we like to publish our residency rules in our catalogs and honor them for a year. So we started looking back at this and we put back in a lot of language, and that's what you'll see here in this document. But we also went a couple steps further, and it was really in response to University of Wyoming's moves toward a little more lenient residency policy. So what you see as changes in this round in terms of how that affects students are those bullets that are in that sheet that I gave you. Acknowledgement that the catalogs are all electronic. That's not a big change, but they asked for 3 copies and we said it's electronic. So we can send you the link 3 times or you can have one. So that we changed that language. Then a statement that the commission shall review tuition rates every 2 years instead of annually. That the commission had decided, but we wanted to put that into the residency rules as well. Eliminate the blanket reference to UNIREG 8.1. We still reference their regulations, but it's not the blanket. Whatever they do, we will do. Eliminate the requirement that a student not be enrolled at a college for a semester in order to apply for reclassification of their status. And this was a problematic one. Earlier, the regulation said you have to not be in attendance for a semester in order to reclassify or apply for reclassification. And that was really intended to show in very material ways that you were in Wyoming for something other than just going to school. Because if you're here to be a student, then you should probably pay out-of-state or WUI rates. So that was what it was, but there was a strong sentiment around the state that that was restrictive and it encouraged students to stop out, and we know when students stop out, they don't return. So we said, let's not make them stop out. Let's just do that at a semester break. So that was the intention there. Then we listed the specific ways that a student might prove or show that their residency is now Wyoming. They've made some specific intentions, and so some of those are you registered to vote, you registered your car for your license here, you got your driver's license here, you have a utility bill, you know, some of the same things that you do to get a driver's license here. I remember that. It's not too distant in my past. And then we shortened it to you have to establish residency for 6 months instead of 1 year. And so as you can see, that's a little more liberal than what we had before, shortened it to 6 months. It's really common in a lot of states to have a 1-year residency, and ours has shortened to 6. And then we left it up to each college as to how many of the 10 different ways that you can prove you're a resident that we would want to see to establish you as a resident here. So we talked about, there are about 4 of them that are pretty easy to do. So it will likely be between 3 and 4 of those at most of the colleges. And then we inserted required language about military affiliation that was required nationally to show that if you are military affiliated, you get in-state residence. Mm-hmm. So those are the big changes, and the commission approved those, and now we are just awaiting the governor's approval, and then I think it's 10 days after that we have to implement. So this will be a change that we will implement mid-year. We'll notify students and we will publish that on our website as a change to the residency policy, and I predict there will be some very happy students with spring semester tuition.
Any questions? Trustees?
Okay.
Great job, Judy.
The other topic that Dr. Schaefer mentioned was an issue that has come up in several states. There are 2 states in the nation, as the last I knew, that have made it a requirement in their state that colleges all put a notation on a transcript if a student has committed a code of conduct violation, including violence against another person, so sexual assaults and assaults. And that's what they pretty much require. Those states are New York and Virginia. However, Colorado puts a bill to their legislature just about annually asking for the same thing. Lots and lots of schools across the nation do it because what we were finding, the journey in Title IX tracking and the adjudication of a lot of student assaults has shown us that students will leave a college and go to another institution and commit the same offense. And they would bounce from school to school to school. And we as institutions weren't communicating about that. So that's what the states are saying. No longer will we pass off our bad apples to other places to prey on other people. If you take in one of these students, you will do it knowingly. So that's the part that we don't have in place here in Wyoming very robustly. And it's my opinion that we do that carefully. So we will be looking at some updates to our admissions policy that gives us some consistent and objective ways to take a student who brings a transcript that has a notation or has a criminal history, and to look at those offenses objectively and with full information so that we make decent decisions regarding the safety of our campus. Right now, we've been an open admission institution, which I think has been interpreted in this state in many ways to be, we need to admit anyone who wants to come. It's not what open admissions really is about. Open admissions means that you don't have to take it's not a selective academic institution. You don't have to have a certain ACT score or those types of things. Open admissions is really about academic ability. And we will not change that designation, but it is part of what we should do to try to protect the safety and security of our campus and our students. So that's what we're looking at, and it will be a procedural change in our admissions policy. And I predict we'll have that kind of ironed out sometime this year.
So Judy, could you tell me, there are boxes to check on the application form that says that a person has committed a felony, and number two, that they've had a sexual abuse case brought against them, and that would be what you would learn about the student, and then you could make a better choice about whether you admit them?
Yes, so the two ways that could come into us would be that we would add some questions on our application that would say, have you ever been convicted of a felony? Have you ever, there are 3 or 4 questions that you can ask that kind of get at all the different ways that, that someone could have been found guilty of a crime of that type. Or, see, in a school proceeding, if we have a student who is found to have violated our code of conduct and assaulted another student sexually, that would not be unless the victim in that scenario filed a criminal case in that way, it would not show up as a criminal case. That would just be a violation of our policies. And the worst I can do to a person who violates those policies is to expel you forever and say, you're never welcome here again. That's the type of thing that would go in a transcript. So that student would come to me, answer those questions and say, nope, 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 I am fine. I have a clean criminal history. And then their transcript might follow them and say, oh, oops, you're not welcome at your former school. And all it would say is, talk to the dean of students at my former school. That's what the notations typically say. And so we would get on the phone and call the James Miller of that school and say, so what happened here? And you do that, when you do those things, you have a release from the student acknowledging that that type of information could be shared with other institutions on request.
I think this is really important for our institution, so thank you.
You bet.
And then, Madam Chair, members of the board, if I could, just so you're aware, so these are some pretty weighty topics when we go down this road. On the one hand, the debate even in Wyoming about what does an open access institution mean? Is it our place, or are we even allowed to be able to ask questions of students coming in and perhaps deny admissions based on previous criminal activity or things like that? That's a big step that starts to look at, the infringement on what some people might see as a right. The flip side of that is there's increasing pressure being placed on colleges and universities to know about the students that are coming in. And when violence in an educational setting happens, one of the first places that people often look is towards the institution. Well, what did you know about this person, and why didn't you do anything? And that's kind of the crux and the pressure we're feeling right at this point. I don't want to leave you with the impression that if a student has a felony and they put that on their application, that they're automatically denied admission. In fact, in general, I would say they're more likely to be admitted than they would be to be denied admission. What it does, though, it provides the opportunity for the college and the student to have a conversation, to set clear expectations, in some case to set monitoring and performance requirements and those types of things. And it makes us aware of the situation so that we can ensure that there's a safe campus environment, but also, really help that student be successful. I can't tell you the details, but at the previous institution that Judy and I were from, we had a young man that actually served, I can't remember the details, but I think it was almost 10 years in prison for gun violence, essentially, for shooting. That came back, and he was admitted, and we admitted him through the process. Lots of debate on campus. And as the CEO at the time, one of the things that it was a requirement, he had to come meet with me to do that. And, a wonderful young man that messed up and was trying to do right by his kids. So it creates an opportunity for those interactions, and it may put additional expectations on students. But right now, we're kind of flying blind by not having that in place. So I just want you to be aware that as Judy and student services folks across the state dig into this, there's two combating issues here between the right for access and the concept of open admissions and the expectation that the college is doing all it can to create a safe educational environment. And, there's no easy answer to this. The devil's usually in the details, but we will probably move down that road of transcript denotation and actually asking some of these questions so we can be better informed and honestly work better with students that are coming in. So just thought it was important for you to be apprised that that conversation is ongoing and where we're headed.
I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Welcome.
Thanks, Judy.
I appreciate knowing what an open admission. I didn't know what that meant. So thank you, Judy.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Trustee Little, state statute, I don't have it right, but it basically says that the community colleges shall admit everyone with a high school equivalency or graduate without any type of additional requirements.
Yeah.
So from an academic perspective, the requirements are generally admission standards that you would find at selective institutions. But you can see where the interpretation is disclosing previous criminal convictions. Is that a requirement?
Yeah.
Or not? And so I think that's one of the things that ultimately will have to be tested and may even get us all the way up to an attorney general opinion.
Well, and I think first strike, you're out. I think people make mistakes. People do things that are wrong, but it doesn't mean that they're a criminal for
Sure.
life. We sometimes need to give a second chance, like this young man. So
Yeah, so statute says a person who graduates from a high school in this state shall be admitted to a community college of this state without further qualifying examination. So the question is this further qualifying examination? But the terms qualifying examination tend to lead you towards an academic consideration, not these things. So it'll be interesting to see how this plans out. Madam Chair, the one thing that's not on your agenda that I do want to share with you, you recall a couple of meetings back, I gave a presentation on sort of where we're headed with the classification and compensation model. And that's progressing based on that presentation and really making good progress. Executive Director Mays and her staff in HR are doing a wonderful job. We are quickly moving into the conversation about compensation, though. And so, the first part of that model and design is really the classification process, how we classify employees into groups, how we determine their FSLA, exempt or non-exempt status, the level we place them within groups, and all that wonderful stuff. It also encompasses our compensation philosophy. But as I covered in that presentation, we need to come to a point of saying, okay, if we're going to implement these market adjustments in this compensation plan, how do we do it? What's the time frame? And are we going to commit to this as an institution? And as you recall, there's sort of 3 or 4 phases we would try to adjust. The first phase, trying to get those that are the lowest on the scale or below the minimum of their scale to minimum, start moving them to the 25th percentile, and eventually get them on pace to fit the compensation model. So at your November meeting, unless you direct me otherwise, and probably before then, I will share with you 2 to 3 financial models that would show how we would phase in these market adjustments. So these are the adjustments just to the people to get them moving so they're closer on the scale. Somebody who's working here right now that's already at or above, their market threshold, we're not going to do anything with those. We're just trying to bring those folks that are farthest down up. So I will present to you 2 or 3 models that will show essentially a budget impact per fiscal year out perhaps to the next, say, 6 or 7 fiscal years. And then I need some indication from the board if this is something you want us to commit to, and then we build it into the budget process that we're currently just getting going already. And so my plan is to get you those models to look at prior to your meeting, and then to have a conversation with you at your November meeting and hopefully come to some determination on where you would like to see us at. And in simple terms, there's going to be an aggressive model, a moderate model, and a very conservative model. And we'll talk through that. But we need to get ready to start moving on that because we have some money already budgeted this year to make some of those adjustments. And so we're sort of eyeing that January time frame to implement those. But we need to have board guidance on what do we want to do. So I will get you that information, and then we'll look forward to a robust conversation and hopefully get some direction from you on where you think we should go. As always, I will bring you a recommendation, so you'll have a place to start on what I think is certainly feasible, but then we'll need your direction as a board.
thank you.
You're welcome.
Not a
Madam
lot.
Chair, that concludes my report unless you have questions for me.
Anyone have questions? Thank you so much, Dr. Schaefer. work items. Here we have Wayne Herr joining us about the audit. He said it was so good that he probably didn't need to say a word.
It's a whole bunch of words.
Welcome, Tara.
But I am limited to 10 minutes, I was told.
Poor Wayne.
Well, appreciate the opportunity to be
A
here.
limit.
My presentation will not be nearly as interesting as Vice President Hayes' presentation. Just the logistics, we submitted last week that drafts of the audit, which were then distributed to the board. The current status is we finished all of our audit work. The product has been reviewed by me, by people at the university or the college, and it's with our last reviewer who is out of town at a nonprofit board meeting the rest of this week, and he'll be reviewing it next week. The data collection form is required to be submitted to the federal government within 30 days of when we issue or release our audit opinion, which is why we do drafts at this meeting, so we have a chance to discuss it. You typically approve those at the next meeting. We usually distribute the final at least a week before that meeting. That gives us then 3 weeks after the approval to get this data collection form in. One glitch on the data collection form that we've called the feds and they don't have a fix yet is when we check the box that you're an institution of higher education, it will then automatically default and show you're an Indian reservation. We don't know why, they don't know why, but we've already done this with one college and maybe you'll get more money. The next board meeting, November 8th, I plan on attending that in case there's any questions. A summary of the financial audit. We issue an opinion on whether the financial statements are fairly presented in all material respects. To reach that point, we have to comply with our professional standards, which identify different types of tests and analyses that we're required to do. And we've gone through all of that, including third-party verifications, analysis of different, both non-financial information as it relates to how financial information is generated, looking at source documents, contracts, accounting treatment, and various aspects such as that to be able to issue our opinion. And our opinion is that your financial statements are fairly presented in all material respects, which is a clean opinion, unmodified opinion. Management writes a management discussion analysis, which is at the beginning and has some nice colorful charts for you. That gives you a summary of what's happened financially with the college over the past year. A couple of real high-level things on the financial statements on the balance sheet. Your restricted cash and investments dropped quite a bit, and that's because of cash that was restricted to be used for construction, and it was used during the year. Your capital assets increased by $10 million because of the Student Gateway Center and the Flex Tech buildings being completed during the year. In terms of the pension accounting, because I know you got an extremely detailed overview of this 2 years ago, we're on the third year. I'm not going to go into much detail on that, except to say that your liability or your expense under this pension standard was $1.7 million more than what your actual cash contributions were. And a big part of that is because your percentage of the total state retirement liability went up because your participation rate as including all the employees covered by the state retirement plan went up. It went up by 0.0195837%. So like less than 0.02%. But when you apply that to $2.4 billion of liability, it results in about $500,000 that you picked up just because your share of the pie went up by that very small percentage. We've talked about how it really doesn't affect what you do budgetarily or anyway, what you do financially. Then we also do a compliance audit under government auditing standards. We issue a report on that. That is not a positive opinion report, it's a negative opinion report, which basically means we did some testing of compliance with laws and regulations that would affect your financial statements if you were out of compliance. We look at your internal control over financial reporting, and if anything comes to our attention as a result of that those tests, we then notify you through reporting a finding, and we did not have any findings in that area. Not from lack of trying to find any, we just didn't find any, but we worked at it. Then we also issue a single audit report, which is actually an opinion report, which is a situation which is required by the federal government because of your federal spending, in which we're required to identify major programs, federal programs. Student financial aid is your major program. We go in and we test internal controls over compliance in that area, and we do enough testing that we can give an opinion on the internal controls for that. And then we also test compliance with the requirements that the federal government gives us through a compliance supplement of the specific things they want us to test. And if we find compliance findings that are significant, we have to report those as well. We do not have any findings to report either with internal control or compliance. We did find some minor things, but for instance, if we find one exception out of a sample of 25, that's not indicative that it's a systematic problem. So what we've decided to do on these this year, because Brandy will be coming in as the new student financial aid director, is, and we've talked about this, Judy and I talked about this briefly too, is we're going to issue a management letter to management, just listing some of those minor things we found. They don't rise to the level to be reported. We don't think they rise to the level of going through the details with you as the trustees. There's nothing there that's indicative of fraud or abuse. These are things like a calculation was done and it came up with 110 days and it should have been 109 days, you know, 1 day off. We just think it's important that Brandy knows what those small items are, so she can just make sure she addresses that in her review process so they don't turn into bigger problems that do rise to the level of being reportable. By addressing it to management, it basically is sending the message that if there's nothing in there, you can ask management to see the letter. That's not an issue. It's really just to establish the accountability at the proper level. And in my opinion, I just don't think it's something that you as trustees should have to worry about following up with, because they didn't rise to the level to indicate any kind of system-wide problem or anything that was material in any respect. It's just really more for a benefit to help the student financial aid director. Your total federal awards for the past year was, lost my notes here, $12,520,941, of which $10.9 million was in student financial aid. So obviously we covered more than the 20% minimum requirement, since we covered about 80%, but unfortunately you don't have any $2 million programs that we can substitute. Upcoming changes that you may want to be aware of. The Government Accounting Standards Board has finally issued their new lease standard, which will be effective for your year ended June 30th, 2020. Unfortunately, I'm not quite old enough to be retired by then, so I will be involved in helping implement this. Basically, all leases, unless they are clearly less than 1 year in length, have to be capitalized on the balance sheet as an asset and a liability. So that's photocopier, it's a 3-year lease, it's any kind of equipment lease that's more than a year, real estate leases, all of them. They're saying you got to put this big asset on the, I said asset, on the balance sheet, and you have to put a big liability on the balance sheet and amortize them off. As far as changes that may occur in the audit area, there's going to be more emphasis on auditors to be looking at more internal control type procedures. And there is a big emphasis now for auditors to start looking at big data and how we can implement tests of big data in our audit process. I'm taking some courses on that now, so I have a little better idea of how that might work. The problem with big data is that when you analyze big data, it's really about what's the result, and it's very difficult to determine why the result is what it is. And that's one of the fundamentals of those that analyze big data, is you can't get lost in trying to figure out the why, because there's too much variability and there's way too much information that you're analyzing. So that's a real stretch for us, because whenever we find something that doesn't line up the way we think it should in our audit process, we're trained to say, why did this happen? You know, why is the projected result we have in our audit procedure not lining up with what the client has recorded? And if you start working with big data, you kind of have to throw that out and say, this is what the data shows, this is what you have, they're different. And chances are the assumption is the person with the big data is right and the other party is wrong. That's a real change in mindset for us. And we did not have any disagreements over accounting treatment. We did not have any restrictions placed on the scope of our audit. we will issue an audit committee letter that indicates those things, that we didn't have any of these difficulties. Every year we do look for ways, and we brainstorm in our planning session, ways to make the audit unpredictable, especially since your accounting manager used to work for us. And so she knows where we look for the bodies. So we have to do some things to mix things up a little bit. And so we changed some things, a couple of things we did this year that are not part of our normal procedures. We did change the methodology we use for testing revenue. And we also, with Harry's departure, on a sample basis, we did look at some accounts to make sure that he had been taken off as a signature on those accounts. That's the quick overview, and I probably did it in less than 10 minutes.
I wasn't watching actually, so good
But-
job.
But if there are any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer
Questions?
those.
Thank you, Wayne. That was great. Maybe we'll have questions next time we come.
Okay,
Thank you so much.
great. Thank you.
Next.
I do want to say something. I don't have a question, but Wayne, I think it's really good for you to give that letter to the new financial aid person. I think that's really good. And you're right. I don't know if my fellow trustees agree, but I don't think we need to see it. But I think it's a really good idea to give it to the financial aid manager. I'd want to have that. So you know where there's a little bit of crack
Sure.
that needs some putty on it before it gets bigger.
I'm probably the only person in this book that's read a book on checklists. But there is a book called The Checklist Manifesto.
Yeah.
And I've become kind of a big proponent that when issues come up, when they're small, whatever it is, whatever type of operational issue might come up where there's little exceptions or things that we just know we need to make sure we do, it's often good to have those documented in some type of bullet
Yeah.
checklist,
Yeah.
just as a reminder to check on those things.
Yeah.
And the benefit is for the financial aid director is actually not just before our audit, but at the end of each semester. And she's extremely experienced. I've talked to her. She knows what she's doing. But to have something that just triggers her memory and she says, oh yeah, I've got to remember to double check this and just make sure, because the auditors will look at it when they come.
Yeah.
Just to make sure.
Yeah, well, I think that's really good. I appreciate you doing that.
Thank you for that. And I guess I was glad to hear that you have to go back to school. It's always good for us, right? You said you had to go back to school
I
to
go to
learn
school every
something.
year. I have to have 40 hours of continuing education.
Okay.
Ms. Nethercock can tell how many the attorneys have to have, but
Oh, boy.
I think it's like 24.
20,
What?
20.
15? Oh, we have to have at least 40.
Oh, they got it easy.
We're not as smart as the attorneys. I didn't say it.
What did you say, O'Meara?
He heard me, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Wayne. Thanks for being
Thank you.
here.
Thanks, Wayne.
Appreciate
I'm
it.
glad you're not retiring before 2020.
Yeah, me too.
Thanks.
Next, Resident Hall Level 1 by Sean and Rick. Presentation. The exciting stuff.
Madam Chair, members of the board, good evening.
Good evening.
We have Sean Benjamin here from Method. You remember Sean was in, I think, in August. And I thought now that we're at this phase of presenting to you a draft level 2, I thought I'd go back just a bit and give you a brief background. But those of you who were on the board back in 2015, predates my arrival here. Tobin and Associates did a level 1. It was much briefer. It was just a level 1. And at that time, what was visioned was a resident hall that was about 180 beds and 43,000 square feet. That's quite different than what we're looking at right now. It also included traditional and non-traditional living arrangements. Non-traditional meaning may have been single parent, apartment style living, this sort of thing. Also at that time, nothing really had been done in a comprehensive way to understand financial viability. So in May of 2017, we brought Method on and asked them to complete a level 2 with schematic design. And there were 3 really key overarching drivers in this. Determine an approach that'll be financially viable. More accurately pinpoint total costs of producing a res hall, and then comprehensively designing that res hall for recruiting and enrollment growth opportunities. So in doing so, the earlier level 1 got validated. We've essentially updated it now with this complete package. And so the result, as you know, is a 350 bed res hall as opposed to 180, 99,000 square feet as opposed to the earlier vision of 43,000. And we do have a financial viability model in place that projects out to 2039, which would cover the length of the debt service, that it appears to be viable for us to move forward should the bond go through and whatnot. So that's the foundation. If anybody was thinking about, we had a level 1 back in 2015. I thought I'd just clear that up. So with that, I'll turn it over to Sean Benjamin for Method to walk you through it briefly.
Thank you, Rick. Welcome, Sean.
Madam Chair, thank you. Members of the board, I appreciate the opportunity to come back and revisit some of this. You've had distributed to you the draft version of our level 1, level 2 documents that we've been putting together. As Rick briefly mentioned, there's also an SD component that's not included in this. It's more technical side of the project that would include some low-level construction type documents as well as specification outlines that give us a better ability to pinpoint cost at an early stage. So, Rick pinpointed basically 3 things. He said cost, we got function, then we got a purpose for this, right? So I'll kind of focus on those 3 points in what I go over on our presentation. To start out, let's talk cost just real quick. Some of the things that Method Studio likes to do is to involve as many people as possible or as early as possible in getting feedback. And we do projects that are all over the Intermountain region, so we don't always have the most up-to-date and specific site-specific information. So we'll not only get our cost estimator involved, but one of our local contractors that works in the area, as well as local contractors that work in the area. So this is what we've done right now. The current estimate that you're seeing in the draft is something that we produced based on feedback from some of those people. Now, we are in the process of working with 4 general contractors as well as our cost estimator to produce estimates at this early level. Moving forward, it may be that the procurement laws actually restrict our ability to do some of this because there's some fairness kinds of things. You don't want to open a bid up to a bunch of contractors that have never seen it when 2 of them have seen it. Right? So we want to make sure that there's an even playing field, and so some of those laws that currently exist will have to kind of be evaluated to see how that affects that process. But nonetheless, in the final version, what we will present is a copy of each of those models from the general contractors as well as our estimator, but we will remove the names of the contractors for anonymity so that there's no ability for one contractor to look at another and gain some sort of advantage early on. So hopefully that alleviates some possible concern. Ultimately, the way that we've looked at this, we've and probably not unlike your other architects, put together kind of a general space diagram that says, these are the required spaces. This is a general cost per square foot. And then we have an associated soft cost that's going to take care of more administrative kinds of things. When we get down to the bottom line here, if our budget were to be a $231.50 per square foot budget, that would keep you just under $28 million total all-in budget. So that's what we have in there right now as that placeholder. A part of this, a part of what informs our cost is our schedule. Depending on how long the schedule goes or how short it is, that can raise their general conditions costs. It can also soften the blow of a condensed schedule. So those are things, the procurement method that we'll want to look at in the next phase so that we come up with a strategy for getting a contractor on board at the right time and hopefully for the right cost. Something that Method Studios is, I guess we're kind of proud of it in a way, is how we go about the design process. And that design process for us has to be contextual. It has to be about your location. It has to be about your needs and your situation. If it's about us, if it ever starts becoming about us, we've blown it. We've already gone wrong. So we start out by really going back to that cover sheet and looking at you, right? And so what you see on the screen here is a handful of images that are snippets of not only the natural environment, but the built environment around you, the things that you see on a day-to-day basis or on the weekends when you go out of town, things that make up your sort of subconscious of Cheyenne, what it is that is building your self-image in a way, and that image that you want to portray to potential students. This goes also down into really some deeper levels about what is this about. We're not really building you a residence hall right now. But what we're trying, I don't want to sound like a used car stuff on here, but we're trying to build an experience for your students, right? We're trying to create with you something that provides an opportunity for people to open up their minds in a way that they might not have done so before. And so that's the primary goal when we do this. We want to set aside our ego. We want to make sure that your relevant material is portrayed accurately and in a way that's going to be meaningful to your students. So when we get into design, I think last time around, Rick was able to show you some of the renderings that we had done as a conceptual thing for the campaigns. Those things are based largely on our study of the site, what happens in your site. Some of the neat things that we got to do this time around that we haven't done in the past, I think we did a wind study that we've never done, which, you know, we're always open. We're kind of a research-based firm, so we like to open our eyes to new aspects of design. And so you see some of this cool imagery on the screen, the motion around this building, how it's going to affect the site. You know, we know that wind is an issue here, so let's ask what it's going to do around our building. And so that was something that was kind of exciting that we got to look at. Climate, temperature, we get into building narratives in this draft where we'll have all of our engineers walk through the various aspects of their fields of study, and they'll come up with the basic outline for what their scope is going to include on the project. This is everything from, like here, it's a brief code review of the building. A little deeper, we start talking about the structural. We can get into mechanical, electrical. All of these are things that are not really just pulled out of our own hats. It's stuff that we've worked with you to develop. It's stuff that we worked with the engineers. We worked with local consultants, worked with the county to find out what's going to be required, how it's going to be utilized. Move forward. So some of the other studies that we do to help us visualize and understand how the space is going to work includes a circulation diagram, some common spaces that we have distributed throughout. One of the things that we think makes residential hall type projects really successful is to create opportunities throughout the building for interaction, not just an isolated game room or an isolated, kind of a gathering space to watch movies. We want those to be opportunities that are happening throughout, so that somebody doesn't have to go all the way down to the end of the hall to see that it's a crowded room and want to go back to their room. We want them to have an opportunity along the way. Maybe they intend to go down to that main room, but they get pulled off because there's something cool going on over to the left, and maybe they meet somebody new just on these sort of instances. That's what we think is going to create the best environment for a student to have successful education. Here again, the diagrams, they just kind of start to build on the circulation core, and eventually you get to where we have this sort of composite image that shows you how dynamic the building program elements are, how they interact with some of the spaces. Floor plans, I think you guys have seen a little bit of this on this project before, but these are included in here as well. These are the floor plans that we feel like meet the requirement of the level 1, level 2. The schematic drawings that I mentioned earlier are actually something that we use to give us a better picture for cost and get a deeper understanding early on. So this was really sort of that keystone picture that ended up, I think, in our campaign materials, and hopefully that's going well. I hope you're getting good feedback on that, and we'll cross our fingers for the election, right? But when we go back to that first series, that cover series that has those striped images on it, those are the images that build this. Those are the images, that context that help us to understand how this building wants to express that context for you and how you want to reach out to students. We like great architecture. We certainly want to produce great architecture, but we're going to be gone a long time before this building ever is done with its use. You guys will be here. So more important than us being proud of it is we want you guys to be proud of this. We want this to be a tool for recruiting. We want this to be something that your students are excited about. We want this to be something that really is lifting the general atmosphere of campus. And so we hope that that's what that's conveying, and we certainly look forward to moving forward with you on this. But we also included a couple of interior images. This would be like a main entry lobby. The other one is kind of an upper level common area that looked out into a courtyard over to the right. So try and create dynamic spaces and spaces that create opportunities for interaction. Something that we also do that's a little bit different, I think, than most architects is the general requirement really only says, tell us how many spaces there are and what they are. What we'd like to do is, again, to get a better sense for cost, we sat down and we actually sent out surveys to our steering committee and got feedback from a lot of people, and it helped us to actually identify not only what the space was, but what the finished materials are, what kind of electrical requirements we're going to need, what kind of plumbing, what kind of lighting, what kind of storage and closet and furniture and equipment. That's much more about what a program summary is really supposed to be about. The list of spaces is almost more of just kind of an executive catch-all. It says, okay, this is what you need. It doesn't really tell you what you're going to be in for. So what we've done is for each of those spaces, we create one of these data sheets along with the room floor plan and then a 3D diagram to kind of help our steering committees visualize what's going to happen. So that, I think that takes you to like page 160 something or other. Sorry, I'm flying through all these. Unless you really want me to stop, I can. There's the mail room, right? So. The last thing that is not in your drafts, but we will plan on including in the final draft is a list of appendices items. This includes everything from meeting minutes to presentations. It'll include a geotechnical report that was available at the time. Some of the local material that we find, presentations, really everything that we can cram in there. I mean, I even, I'm sorry, the gentleman that left, our accountant, our auditor,
Right.
He had a book on checklists. I even got checklists at the end here. So. I'm just saying. But that's it. We're super excited. It's close. We're not done. There are 2 weeks, I think, for our deadline. Most of what happens at this point is we start to layer in some additional graphic material. We'll go through and proof some of the stuff that we've already got in here. Mm-hmm. Certainly, we would like feedback from either the board or the steering committee, however that's going to work best for you. Probably within the next week, so we can incorporate that feedback. Any questions? I'm happy to field whatever you got.
Madam Chairwoman, Sean, it looks beautiful. We have Derek here from the student, our student trustee. Can I ask at what level students were involved in any of this design or asked about any of this design? Maybe Derek knows that as well.
Yeah, we don't like students to be involved.
Oh, they kind of mess everything up.
They mess everything up.
Yeah.
No, actually, we had great participation from students. A lot of it was coming from our student resident assistants.
Oh, yeah.
I want to say, didn't we have somebody from the student body even?
Sebastian
yeah,
was there,
okay.
yes.
Yeah.
We had 3 to 5 students.
I think at every meeting we had
Good.
at least. Thank you.
Good.
Yeah, there was at least 2 or 3 students at every meeting. So we had great feedback from them. In fact, a lot of times it was interesting because we would get feedback that was taking us in one direction from our steering committee administration, and then the students would comment, and we'd swing the pendulum back the other way just a little bit, right?
Yeah.
So it was good to get that balance and to get the feedback from the people that potentially are staying in.
It was an amazing experience to be on this committee.
I bet it was, Carol.
It was fun and it was,
Beautiful.
productive, very productive, but fun. So thank you.
Yeah,
Sean.
we certainly enjoyed it. I mean, really, student halls are one of the great enjoyments for our firm because we know the impact they can have, and they provide tremendous opportunities. But usually, the people they're working with the colleges and universities are really bar none. They're just excellent. So that's certainly the case here.
You have a
Thank you.
question? Okay, we have a question here.
I was wondering how the ongoing maintenance was considered in the whole design process.
So we've worked somewhat with Bill's. I just about said Zonk. I did say
Tired.
Zonk. I said it. I'm sorry. Bill's Inc. We worked with Bill's Inc. quite a bit to talk about how the facilities are going to be run in terms of the equipment side of things. We do expect some more feedback from Bill in terms of the operations and maintenance. So, and ultimately, those are pieces of the equation. While they are part of the level 1, level 2, those are pieces that we'll definitely dive into during level 3, because that's when you start to see how the spaces and arrangements are really going to affect that O&M side of things.
Don?
Madam Chair, I have a question about washrooms and showers for single rooms.
For single rooms.
Yeah.
What page are you on, Don, please?
I'm on no page. I'm having a hard
Oh,
time.
you can't find it. Okay.
Well, that has nothing to do with that. I'm just
Okay.
trying to get an understanding of where the showers and the washrooms are for the single rooms.
So part of what this project is doing that's a little bit unique is that we are providing something that's called a wet core. It's a little bit like a traditional dormitory where you have a consolidated restroom and shower and vanity and sink area. However, we've sort of created a hybrid in that you don't have a pole with 6 showers, all in one pole. What we have is 6 individual shower rooms, toilet rooms with a sink. This is starting to become a trend throughout the nation, actually. And what it does is it provides an economic solution for a usually very expensive plumbing requirement. So,
Well, you're getting toward the question. On that particular diagram, all right, where would the washrooms and the showers be?
so on this one, the way it gets set up is for a certain bed count. We want to have a certain number of toilets and showers, a kind of a prime ratio, right? So in this area over to about this point, we have this core. And then for this side of things, we have a second core here.
Mm-hmm.
When you flip over to the other side, similar, we have kind of an arrangement that's going to accommodate a certain number of beds. And then also on this upper level in particular, we have a fourth wet core in this area.
And
Let's,
that's on page 103, I think.
And 101
Yeah.
also has a picture of one of those wet cores. I was totally against them until I heard what the students said and you explained it, and it makes sense. Makes sense now. Don,
Yeah.
you have more questions,
Yeah.
I know.
There is a formula, obviously, for every so many students, you're going to have X number of lavatories. And now these are individual showers.
They are, yeah.
They're not gang showers, they're individual showers.
No, yeah. So each room would have a shower, toilet, and a sink. Now, each of each of the units themselves, whether it's a single or a double bed unit, has a vanity and a sink also. But what we do is we pull out the toilets and the showers so that they're consolidated more in one area. And yes, there is a ratio. I think it happens to be 1 to 6. I think on this project is what we went with. So, some other schools, Pennsylvania, Maryland, they have projects that are as high as 1 to 8. When we talk with those guys, they say, yeah, one day it's working. I wouldn't push it any further though. So
How you
we
handle
back down a little.
gender?
What's that?
How you handle the gender so that you have the girls and the boys. You got 3, I think I saw 3 restroom areas.
Yeah. So depending on the floor, there's anywhere from 3 to 4 wet core areas. We
Equal
actually
amount
did,
for both sexes?
it can be done however we want. We actually discussed it in an entirely open scenario. So, and that's part of the benefit of having each of these spaces enclosed and self-contained, is that if all genders are allowed into a certain area, they still have the privacy that they would require or desire, I think. It certainly could be layered off so that either you're an all-girls floor, an all-boys floor, or you're an all-girls core and an all-boys core. To be determined, I think, in that regard, though.
Thanks.
It's an interesting question because I think that each of these wet cores have individual bathrooms in them, and then they have a long vanity where you might be brushing your teeth next to a girl or a boy, the other sex. But you actually have your own bathroom with I think a toilet, a sink, and a shower.
You have your own cubicle within the complex.
That's exactly right. But then when you're done, to be polite to others who might be waiting, you go out and brush your teeth in the common area that has sinks in it. So you're there together.
Remember, I went to college a long time ago.
Yeah, I know, me too.
It's a lot different these days.
I was totally against this. Rick, what do you have to say?
I just wanted to add a piece to this particular, Trustee Erickson, Madam Chair. If you turn to page 68, bottom left-hand corner, you'll see this 3D depiction of where the wet cores occur. The one to add here is, when we entered this project, trying to figure out how can we pull this off in a cost-effective way. One way to do that was considering the wet core. And we actually thought the students wouldn't support it. What we found is that the students actually really embraced it, because these wet cores are spa-like. I mean, they're rather lavish finishes. It's a nice place you want to be in. And coupled with that method brought to us is this neighborhood concept. So if you really study these pictures, you see that there's a neighborhood on a floor with a wet core, and a neighborhood with a wet core. And then you look at some of these other common spaces, they're intertwined in there. So this really resonated with the student feedback, and just swayed us that, well, this wet core is the way to go.
No, and surprisingly, I think for those that were there, they might remember, but the boys were the most apprehensive about this. And you would think maybe they were a little more encouraged by this, but they were a little bit nervous about the idea of not being fully done up for the girls next to them at the vanity. So it was kind of comical. But yeah, it was a great example of where, staff led us one way, and we got other feedback from the students that led us a second direction.
Well, and there are enough wet cores on a floor that you wouldn't have to use the one that was closest to your room. You could choose to use another one, correct?
Yeah, that'd be entirely up to however the directors wanted to run those kinds of things.
Okay.
We've seen it every way, which, it's just a free for all, go and be where you can fit in. We've also seen it where it is more of a family setting or a neighborhood, to use that phrase, kind of a setting, so that up to a certain point, you are designated that wet core. And maybe there's also some cleaning responsibilities involved or something to that effect. So.
Perfect. Thank you. Any other questions? Well, thank you for coming back. I do have something I want to tell Rick, so he can tell you later.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sean. It's beautiful.
It is beautiful.
And Madam Chair, if I can, I can't resist pointing out the fact, the dedication that Sean had. You drove from Salt Lake today, correct?
I did.
Yeah. So long ways over here and a long ways back, but we appreciate the in-person presentation and the connection that you provided.
So are you going home tonight, or are you staying?
I'm going to stay in Beetletown.
Okay, good. So you can.
I like to drive it, not as much when it's black.
Yeah, nobody does. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Schaefer. Work items. Now we have, I guess we're moving on down here to policies. First reading, board committee policy 1.2.6. Dr. Schaefer.
Yeah, Madam Chair, before I get into those, just as a reminder on the work items. So this is your first reading essentially of the level 2 study for the residence hall. You will get a final draft of that at your next meeting, at which you'll be asked to approve that project. So just a reminder that this is the first reading. Look through it. If you've got other questions, suggestions, you find something that needs to be changed, let me know, and let Rick know, and we'll pass it along, and then we'll bring the final one to you here at your next meeting in November.
So let me ask you this, it's not written in stone at that point, there can still be changes that happen. Is that correct, or is it pretty finalized by then?
Madam Chair, members of the board, I always try to walk this fine line. I don't want to leave the impression that as we go into the final stages of essentially schematic design and really into construction documents and things like that, that there's room for substantial change. Right. This is the model, but sure, there's always the opportunity for things to be modified with all three of these projects, from where they are at the level 2 study to where we actually end up when we've got, the contractor working on building the actual buildings. But I don't want to, we're not going to throw it all out and start over by any means. But yes, there's always that potential for slight modifications.
But Madam Chair, we will have the election, correct? The day before, let's see, when is our next meeting, Vicki? The 8th. So we will we'll know the results of the election when we have our next meeting. And so I would assume that even though we may want to modify things a little bit, when the election passes, we have a set budget that we still need to stay within, right? Because that's what the voters have approved.
Madam Chair, Trustee Little, yes, I mean, we can't see these things grow exponentially after that.
Right.
Depending on the outcome of the election, our conversation on the 8th could be very different with these projects too. So, we have to keep that in mind. But again, there's room for tweaking, I think, and Sean and Rick, tell me if I'm off here, with these as they actually go towards construction documents and, really we start building. But again, we won't make substantial changes for that. In general, what we found in past projects is we end up having to do value engineering to bring them into budget with what actually is bid. But as Rick said in the past, one of the things that impressed us so much about Method was their willingness to not only work with their cost estimators, but then to try to get local data from contractors and subs to try to validate or triangulate what they think the cost will actually be. And even in this, where I think we thought we would be, once we got local information, was actually brought that price back up to what we believe, just because of the local market. So hopefully pretty accurate with regard to cost projections.
Thank you.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
So Madam Chair, you have 2 policies back to you for first reading, which means they're just here for your consideration, comment, questions now. To go back in time, you actually saw these quite a while ago as you originated the changes to these two policies. They have gone through the entire consultative feedback process. So they went out with the procedural aspects, went out to the President's Cabinet, out to consultative feedback, to College Council, back to President's Cabinet, and ultimately through me and to you, without any changes from where they originated. But just as a reminder and a recap, they're interrelated. The first one, in regard to your policy on board committees, you wanted to formalize the establishment of a performance evaluation committee. And that committee essentially had 2 processes that it was responsible for. The first was, in accordance with your policy on self-evaluation, to monitor and deploy the process that you use for your board self-evaluation. The second one, in accordance with the other policy that's here with changes, is to essentially monitor, design, and facilitate the process for the evaluation of the president of the college. So that's essentially the changes to the board's committee policy, is formalizing that performance evaluation committee and saying, hey, look, committee, you have these specific responsibilities. Facilitate the board self-evaluation, facilitate the process for the evaluation of the president. So that's the first one. And then under the CEO evaluation and accountability policies, what you wanted and what we had discussed was actually putting more detail in to what are the specific requirements, the processes and the expectations of the evaluation of the president. So underneath the presidential evaluation, we added in the process of goal setting and the collaborative effort that the president and the board of trustees have in actually establishing the goals, when they should generally be established by. The expectation that the president produces you an institutional effectiveness report. So you can say is the president being effective in actually accomplishing and achieving the outcomes for the institution that we want, and a general time frame for that. An expectation for a mid-year progress update, typically in the winter. The expectation that the president will provide you his or her annual self-evaluation, and then the presidential evaluation that, of course, you all engage with. And so the additions here are essentially really spelling out the expectations and the pieces that are associated with the evaluation of the CEO. So they're interrelated. You kind of have to look at them together, but again, they are as they were when you essentially changed them and started this process some months ago. I'm happy to answer any questions. And again, if there's feedback now or something you want to change, it'll be before you at your next meeting for final approval. But again, these are, as I believe, Vicki, as they were when they left here originally.
Yeah, it doesn't.
Yep. Any questions?
There was no feedback.
No
Yeah.
feedback. Perfect.
It's hard for me to believe that we used to just say the board will evaluate the president's performance according to contractual obligations.
I know, that
That's
was a
all we
long time
said.
ago, don't you
Yeah.
think?
Is that a recommendation to go back to that language?
No.
We've come a long way.
It sounds
is what
like
I
we
want
were
to say.
trying to go fast and easy there, I would guess. I was a part of that, so I should remember.
Yeah, you did a good job too. Thanks.
Okay, if there are no questions, then we'll go ahead to approval items. Recreation and Athletic Complex Level 2 Feasibility Study.
Madam Chair, I'll turn to Vice President Johnson and have him walk you through actually the two. Again, these are you call them your second reading in these level 2 reports. Yeah, you saw them at your last meeting. I don't think there's been anything substantial changed to either one of those, and they're back to you for your final approval tonight.
Madam Chair, members of the board, Joe's absolutely right. What you have with the final level 2s on those two projects are wholly unchanged from what you saw last go around. I think on the rack, there was a little bit of wordsmithing that occurred. I'm even trying to remember the phrase that they were trying to make sure it was in there in a consistent way. And that's about it. So there's really nothing to call out by way of change. Level 2's there for your approval.
Madam Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we approve for second reading the Recreation and Athletic Complex Level 2 feasibility study.
A second, please.
Second.
Just seconded. Is there any discussion?
Oh, yeah.
Any
I'm
discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? It is unanimous, Vicki. Next, we have the Fine and Performing Arts Expansion and Renovation. Is that correct?
Madam Chair, members of the board, that is correct. And again, this is essentially the same report that you considered and discussed at your last meeting. It's here before you for your approval, and that's my recommendation that you do approve the Fine Arts Level 2 Expansion and Renovation Plan.
I recommend approval of the Fine Arts Renovation and Expansion Level 2 feasibility study.
It's very hard to say, but thank you, Jen.
I'll second that.
And Wendy seconded the motion. Is there any discussion? There being none, all of those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone who disagrees, please say aye. It's unanimous, Vicki.
Well, that was fast.
But it's been very slow. Yes, Butch?
If I could ask a question, Rick. In all three of these projects, is the soft costs all around 20%?
What was the question, please, Butch?
In all three of these projects, I noticed on the resident call that we had a construction cost breakout, and then we had a soft cost of 20%.
Oh, okay.
And I'm just curious if that's just fairly standard in all three of these projects.
Madam Chair, Trustee Cato, I think that might be slightly different on the fine arts with one portion of it, which is the auditorium, because some of the furnishings, fixtures are more expensive than, outfitting other space. But generally speaking, yes, and I think that is very typical. It's been our experience here, and that's what we've done in the res hall as well.
Thank you. Thanks, Rich. Moving on to board reports. The first one is the board self-evaluation. Vicki so kindly got this together for us, and I appreciate it. And thank you, everyone, for participating. I would like to discuss, first of all, what does the LCCC Board of Trustees do well? If you have any comments on that.
Did we get a handout?
Yes, we did. Oh, maybe I printed mine at home.
Okay. I
It's
can
just
get
a
it.
two-page.
Here's my
Where
copy.
was it?
It's linked on your iPad.
Oh,
That's my hard copy.
that's your hard copy. You keep it.
Oh,
Okay. I got one. I looked it over before, but I just need this. See what I got.
You can have mine on.
He's
No.
good.
I'm good. She's gonna get on mine.
We'll get it all handled.
I lost it there. So.
Bye, Christine. Does anyone have any questions, any comments about this? Okay, I will make a comment. It seemed as though we are all on the same page. We all think kind of the same. We think we get along. We think we're doing a good job. We're respectful. We listen to one another. We work well together. That's what I took away from this first section.
Madam Chair, question 2 was what we could do better.
Okay, we're on number 1 right now. Do you want?
Oh,
Are
I'm
there any
sorry.
questions or comments on that? If not, let's move to number 2. Brenda?
I thought I was very informed reading the answers to question number 2.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it would be great for us to sometime have a discussion on the responses to question number 2. I think it would be good for us to really learn from our self-evaluation
Mhm.
and for us to sit down at some point and evaluate of these items where folks said these are things we could do better, kind of prioritize those and talk about ideas of how we could implement some of those
Would you like to do
comments.
that in a retreat, maybe in January?
Um,
That's often where we do this
I
kind
guess
of
it's
work.
January's not that far away, is it? I was
No.
gonna say, I don't want to wait till January, but that's not that far away. So sure, yeah.
Or we can do it now if we want to.
No, I'm not requesting we do it now, but unless other folks want to, but I would be okay with the retreat in January if everybody else is.
Okay,
Yeah, I think it's a good idea to do it later because the Las Vegas trip, there's lots of
Oh,
ideas
yes.
that we learned.
Yeah,
that,
that's true.
Like in 2-3 minutes we might have here, probably would not be appropriate to flesh
Yeah,
out
a
ideas
good
that we
idea.
might need to bring back and changes that we might want to bring forward. And then the Casper work that a few of us went to would also be interesting to kind of talk about and how we might play those out.
I agree with Bob.
Okay, so we'll take these home again and we will look at them and we'll have this as one of our retreat items of discussion in January. Thank you very much. Let's see. Pathways to Prosperity. Those of
can have
us
that
who went to Las Vegas. Who would like to start?
I can start.
Thank you, Bob.
I would thank Trustee Erickson for kind of insisting and suggesting that we go and that it would be an eye-opening
I
experience.
never insisted.
Yes, she did. Gently. But I think it was useful because I gained some insights by really hearing what other trustees from other community colleges were doing, and also kind of the idea of how the difference between an elected trustee and a lot of the trustees that were there were appointed trustees. And I think that the perspective of an elected trustee is quite different. And maybe at our retreat, you can talk about some of those differences. So I just want to state that in the beginning. But the second thing was the pre-meeting that we had here. That exact topic was talked about at one of the sessions that I went to, and I would just want to refer to that one in particular. because having been a former teacher, the idea of how do you open the gates so that you let more students in and let more students achieve, I think is an important one to me. And I think sometimes putting up the roadblocks, one of the comments was made in one of the sessions was that, why are you having to meet this certain criteria? Well, some of the people said it was because, and I'm a former math teacher, is because the math teachers thought that was a great idea. But it really wasn't looking at the total success that the students might be achieving down the road, and could they achieve it? And this one college in particular got rid of some of the requirements that have these extra tests. I don't even know some of the names of these tests. I was learning a lot there. But they found out that when they gave some of the, I think it's called AccuPlacer, that when they gave some of the instructors the test, they couldn't even pass it. So if we're using, I don't know if we're using that, but if we're using that, then maybe we should look at some of those kind of issues. Can instructors pass that test, and where would they place? And so they decided to throw that away and put students in to courses that challenged them, and most of the students rose to the challenge. And I thought that was a very interesting idea and feedback for me and observation from that perspective. So I'll stop at that point.
Thank you. That was very good. Okay, Wendy, I think you're next.
Oh, well, I thought it was very interesting. I attended a number of different sessions that were interesting, including one about bringing a TEDx talk to your college, which was very interesting. The college was in Sand Hills College in North Carolina. They brought a TED talk to their college and said it was a very intense process, and they invested about $10,000 in that, but they probably could have done it for less. But they found it to be a very, they thought it was a very good process, and that they would, although it was a lot of work, they would probably do it again because it brought a lot of people in the community out and got them involved in the school. I also attended an interesting session on DACA, and it was interesting because it was a bipartisan. They had a Democrat and a Republican, a Obama supporter and a Trump supporter, who both talked about the benefit and how the DREAM Act has been a bipartisan act that's been gone before Congress numerous times and has not made it through Congress, and how hopeful they both were that hopefully Congress will resolve this issue for Dreamers, and that the Association of Community College Trustees is supportive, and they actually are sending a letter to Congress in support of resolving this issue for Dreamers. So those were a couple of the interesting things. I also attended one on declining enrollment. So I have a number of interesting things that we can talk about also at our retreat.
Thank you. I have to say it was really fun to be there with the three of you, and Jess, you're next.
Well, it was very exciting. Learned a lot. They had about 10 to 15 concurrent sessions going on. So you had to pick of numerous things. I mean, being a first-time attendee, it's a little bit overwhelming because you're like, what is all this? But you can, hopefully next year, if we're able to go, it might be a little bit easier to navigate through, figure out what you want to go to. There was quite a few. I went to New Pathways to Student Success, update on federal priorities, a view of the modern two-year college, emergency preparedness, and successful partnerships. There's just a few. It was nice to see that we are doing most of these processes, and they are in motion. As to some other colleges, I don't think they have the same processes going that we do. It seemed like they were like, what? It was kind of in the dark. So it's good to see that we're working towards everything that's what's supposed to be right and what everybody's trying to achieve at this point in time. So I learned a lot. Same as Wendy and Bob, I think, will have a lot to discuss at the
Oh, good.
Oh, yeah.
retreat. So.
Thank you, Jess. And I think it's always an opportunity for us to learn more. I was elected the delegate, so I did go to that meeting and I did vote. And our representative of diversity from Riverton lost, unfortunately, to another candidate. But Walter Raggy told me that he stepped it up and volunteered for something else immediately. So he's a go-getter, and so we're not out of the picture here. The meetings I went to, I don't know how many I went to, but I went to quite a few. But mine are all social issues, and what I realize is when I go to these meetings for the trustees is I'm really not bringing back much information for the college because this college is really running very smoothly. I'm bringing back the information for the trustees. Although I did show this to Dr. Schaefer and I did show it to Judy, and a summer free, and this is about when a student is almost ready to graduate, if they only have 8 hours left, we'll give them 8 hours in the summer for free to get them to graduate by September and maybe move on to university. And I thought this is over in Scottsbluff. And Judy told me that we have a 6-hour program here at LCCC, so not new information, but I thought it was fascinating. Okay, this really troubled me. Hungry and homeless in college. This is something that is pretty darn terrible. So anyway, and they called it food insecurity, which I'd never heard before, but now I know that word or that phrase. And so I don't think you can study when you're hungry. And so one of the items that they talked about was not just the food bank where people can go in and get so many items from our free food bank, which will be down in the crossroads. But they talked about giving the student a card that they could also use in our cafeteria so that they aren't singled out as different than the other students. They can actually go in there and be with the people that they take classes with. And we would somehow scholarship up I don't know how to do it, Lisa, but we'll figure that out if we decide to do it. Give them a loaded card so that they can go in and eat with the other students. So I really like that. And then the last one, social issue, was the addiction recovery and student success. And we kind of talked about that, didn't we, Judy? If somebody has an addiction problem, maybe we house those people who have addiction and are in recovery in a special place in our dorm so that they have that they're together and they can do their recovery in the same place, and they're not placed with the other students where maybe drinking or using is occurring without our knowledge. And I really liked that there was some section that, I don't know how many students we have that are in recovery. Maybe they don't self-disclose, but if they do, that would be an amazing thing to have at our college where we can say we're taking people who are in recovery and we're going to make them safe and educate them. So that's my report. I know I'm pie in the sky here, but I think that everybody deserves a second chance, and especially in that area. So, okay, thank you very much, and thank you for sending us and spending the money on us. Next, we have the WAC meeting in Casper. Trustee Erickson?
Are you talking about the WAC conference?
I am. Meeting, it says
Well,
meeting.
There were a couple of meetings there,
Okay.
obviously. Let's deal with the WAC conference. I'll say a couple words to start off, and we also had Brenda there and Bob. So please add on when I finish. As you recall, this particular conference in the fall has been held in Laramie for a number of years. And it was felt that Laramie was a difficult place to get to for some of the trustees. So the Education Committee of WAC re-examined the the objectives of the conference and decided to focus solely on trustees, that this would be an educational conference for trustees, and that we invited each of the colleges to make a presentation of a best practice at the college. We had Judy and our financial aid person talk about FAFSA and how FAFSA has been upgraded here at this facility. And we had a number of really interesting presentations, and I'm sure that either Brenda or Bob will want to speak on one or the other that they may have found to be extremely insightful. In addition to having these best practices, we had the good fortune of having 3 legislators join us for dinner. And that was the Speaker of the House, Harshman, the majority leader, Republican majority leader for the Senate, Landon, and also I think the chair of the Justice Committee, Drew Perkins. Okay, and they gave us a review of what they think is going to happen in the budget session. However, in their review, they didn't tell us much other than the fact that they tiptoed around everything. And to some extent, they said, well, we do realize that if we do any more cutting, we're cutting people, that they were concerned about what's going to happen in this next session. It's going to be a very difficult one. But there wasn't any real proposal, but there was a sensitivity, I think, that each of them presented to us, that they were really concerned about how they're going to get through this budget session, deal with the recalibration for K through 12, funding for the colleges, funding for the municipalities, funding for a variety of different places. And they really encouraged all trustees to contact our legislators. You are bombarded by various lobbyists, and these lobbyists all have obviously a message that they're going to present, and they like to hear from individual trustees. And so we do that as trustees, and we'll continue to do it. I received from from all the people that I talked to at this particular conference, that this was one of the better ones that we put on. And what made it so appealing to everyone was the fact that it was focused on trustees, on what's going on in our respective colleges. And with that, I'll just pass it to the other trustees that attended.
Again, a good learning experience, good to interact with the other trustees. One of the things that there was lots going on there. I really enjoyed the session with the legislators, representatives. It was insightful to me, the conversation before they got up there, because I happened to be sitting at the same table where Don was quizzing them. And there was a lot of other things happening in there that probably they didn't say once they got up to the stage. And I think it sounds positive, but I don't know if they're just being politicians and saying something, and then the result will be different later on. Don't put that in paper. No.
She left. You're safe.
Oh, good. Okay.
Although Creighton over there is recording.
All right. But one of the things, and I think Trustee Little might talk about this too, is one of the sessions was called Moving Toward Predictive Scheduling, which had to do with how do you get students, instead of reactive ways for scheduling classes, that you have to use some, I'm going to say it the way I feel about it, some sense in terms of thinking what should be offered, not just what instructors want to teach, but what actually are students demanding, and kind of working that way. And also looking toward that idea of completion for the students. How do you offer the courses in a pattern that students can actually complete in a timely manner? So more about that later, hopefully at our retreat.
Sure. I at least warned my people that they were going to speak.
Oh, I knew. I thought it was great. I've been to several of these, and I have not had such a positive experience in the past. This one was excellent, and Aaron had put together a really good program. As far as the legislators were concerned, they did encourage us to speak with our legislators. So Tara Nethercott is my senator, so she may be getting a call from me to say, let's go have lunch, Tara, so I can.
My senator.
Yeah.
I think I represent all of you.
She will come to our retreat.
I represent all of Cheyenne. Just like four.
Okay.
So we could invite her out to lunch and tell her our opinion.
I'm pretty clear on the issues.
I was inspired by several of the sessions, and in a bunch of them, I teased Joe that I wrote down JS next to all of them with a big circle, so I knew what to ask him. We heard something on an outdoor learning session that I thought was fascinating. Central Wyoming College does a session of teaching out in the mountains, in cooperation with Knowles. And we had a great discussion about that. And I mentioned that we were on the high plains, and one of the faculty members there said, you have these great bike paths. And then Bob and Don and I were talking, we also have that plot of land out west of town. I really would like to talk about that at our retreat and get some possibilities there. I think it's great. A lot of young women were involved in that program, which really fascinated me. The predictive scheduling that Bob already mentioned, I think we should take a really good, strong look at that. And I have heard comments from community members. I heard one actually a couple of days ago that they sign up for a class and then they're told we're canceling that class. And this would help in that area. There was an investment fund. Joan Evans was there. She works for George K. Baum now. And there was some discussion about the college belonging to an investment portfolio that is allowed through statute. And it kind of allows the college to have its money growing rather than sitting dormant. I think that's something that we should look at. And then last, there was a session on a meditation course for students. And I thought it was great. And not all of us are basketball players and football players and golfers. And some of us really enjoy things like yoga and meditation and get a lot out of them. So I was going to ask, that's something else I would like to discuss. We learned more. Those were the things that really touched me that I remember, but we would have a lot to talk about in our retreat.
Madam Chair, the session is on the website for WAC.
Okay.
And so each one of the best practices, there's a review that's on the website for WAC.
Good to
And
know.
I encourage, if you have any interest in those and you want to get some more information on any one of the topics, please let me know.
Thank you, Don.
Other than that,
Thank you,
anything else?
It was very, very well done. I was very impressed.
Perfect.
I hope we can all go next year. I think it'd be good.
Perfect. Yes, let's do
I
that.
don't believe so.
So, Don, are we moving down to number 4, the WAC? Not the WAC.
The WAC meeting.
Yes. please.
Okay, now the WAC also had a board meeting.
Oh,
And 2 of us from this board have been elected to serve on the WAC board. All 7 colleges have 2 individuals, Brad, Parker, and I represent this board. We had a meeting. It was not a very long meeting. We basically covered some of the things that you would expect, like the financials, and then we reviewed the conference, and people on the board, they all had the same comments that the 3 of us have just conveyed to you today. We also are looking at our February Trustee Education Day, which is the legislative day. It will be, gosh, I wish I could remember. I think it's the 21st Thank you. The 21st of February, this is when we will have a half day of education and then the next half day for advocacy to meet with our legislators over there at the temporary Capitol building.
I'm gonna have to look at that.
And our education topic will focus on economic diversity and what's happening with the Endow efforts at this time. There's been a little more conversation about whether we would have a continuing, a sequel to the GISS, the Government Institute for Student Success. Throughout all 7 colleges, there wasn't really a large desire to have a sequel where we all would get together and spend the money that would be required, and looking like about $4,000, $5,000 per college. And the directors for WAC, we have for the last year have indicated to Aaron, our executive director, that that's just out of line. It's just too expensive. And the ACCT has come up with some alternatives. None of those alternatives were acceptable, such as doing some video interaction. They thought it would be much better for all of us to be together or to do it individually. So the bottom line on this is that we're going to keep $2,000 in the budget for some type of follow-up for the student success. And we're going to throw it back to ACCT and say, hey, how about looking outside the box? What kind of thing might you be able to do for us that is not what you've done for other people? And evidently, we're somewhat of a shining star in the ACCT. The state of Wyoming is a kind of a shining star because of what we did there. And when we had all the colleges there, plus our commission, and that we had very good attendance, and we worked diligently individually for our colleges, and they were very impressed. And I believe they have a couple of videos that are on their ACCT website that are, pumping up how good Wyoming is. So I thought that was kind of good news. We then also approved the executive secretary's goals for the year. And obviously, probably the most important goal is advocacy. And then she's going to be spending some time on improving the communications across the state. She'll continue to visit every college.
You're talking about Aaron.
Aaron, yeah, the executive secretary, Aaron Taylor.
Aaron Taylor.
She wants to rework the website. And then we also talked about, as a result of meeting with the presidents, we met as a board of directors, we met with the presidents before our board meeting. And one of the things that came up a couple of times is the fact that every college is an economic engine here in the state. And that this is in connection with Endow and the like. And a thought came up to me, at least, how can we graphically display the economic engine of these community colleges? And a thought came to me is, I wonder if we might just, with our graphics people, say to them, how would you visually display an economic engine? And I think we might want to look at that. So this is going to be one of her goals too, to increase the message of all of us as all of the colleges that we're presenting in a unified manner to the legislature and to the people and to industry and business as well. So you might want to think a little bit about how you would graphically display an economic engine. I had a simple thing like, was it Thomas the Train? No, seriously, a little engine, but then what would that engine look like? I mean, what would the engineer be? The president of the colleges up there with your little hat?
We're typically the caboose. I got to be honest with you. So.
Well, we didn't quite think that. So we had an excellent directors meeting. And the next meeting of the directors will be in December, at which time we will also want to have our two representatives from here elected, because we do that in December. So that's an item that we want to make sure is on, Vicky is on our agenda in December.
Okay. Thanks for staying on task.
On what?
Task.
Okay.
Thank you. It's getting late. Okay, you're next again.
What's this time?
Finance and facilities.
Okay.
You're reporting.
Well,
on
the
September
meeting,
13th.
yeah, the F&F meeting met on Monday. Madam Chair, you were there, and Trustee Ketchum was there. And we reviewed what's going on with the Crossroads remodeling at this point. We'll get an update as a full board, I believe, at the next meeting. Where is that in December? December, the December meeting. And it's really, there's tremendous amount of input that the students gave. And Derek, and I suspect you might have been involved in giving some of that input too. And so that's moving along. I understand that we might be a little bit over budget with that, just a teeny little bit, not big, but just a little bit.
$1 million?
Yeah, no, it's under $1 million.
Oh, was it? Okay.
If it's over $1 million, we have to go talk to
Okay,
that a girl.
whatever.
Okay. So we also looked at the need and pushing forward, and this is in Madam Chair's bailiwick. She's always interested in wayfinding, but it's time now for a little more attention to the wayfinding internally, as well as what we've done externally. And with NOLA now aboard, she has been giving us some education on our fund balances and helping us to understand the various fund balances that we have. And that has been very, very helpful for the committee. And then we reviewed the contracting report, which had nothing new. Our financial statements are all in order, nothing to bring to the attention of the board. So I make a motion to accept the procurement and contracting report and the financials for October.
Second, please. Just seconds. Any discussion or questions? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? It's
One more
unanimous.
comment. We will not have an F&F meeting in November. And the main reason for that is the meeting is going to be on the 8th. And information from the county assessor will not be available for us to review by that time. So we're just going to pass that on and skip November and go into December. So our next meeting will be in December.
Is it the 5th?
We haven't, we selected the 6th, I believe.
Okay.
Let me look here. That's the date of our meeting.
That's the same date as the meeting, right?
Is that going to work out?
Well, we selected it. Oh, you weren't there when we did that. Will it
Okay,
work out
well.
for you, Madam Chair?
Which day?
The 6th of December
At what time?
at 11 o'clock.
Sure.
And again, all of the trustees are more than welcome to be with us.
Oh, yeah, I wasn't there.
Yeah, you had to leave early.
I did. Okay, so what day of the week is that?
Wednesday,
Wednesday, the day of the meeting,
the day of the board meeting.
the day of the board meeting. Sure. Thank you so much, Don. You've done a great job. Ex officio trustee updates. Butch Cato, please. Are you asleep over there? Yes.
Madam Chair, couple items. Dr. Hammond and I had a chance to kind of go over some things on the ride over. That's always a nice way to get caught up on the Albion County campus. They're moving forward a little bit on the fermentation science program. And
Fermentation science, as in wine?
here.
What's going on over there?
Wow.
You need to come over and see us.
I guess I do.
We want to.
So, there is a advisory council that has been formed for input, and I understand that a survey will be going out fairly shortly to people within Wyoming, businesses that have a need for hiring people in the fermentation science area, what kind of programs, certificates, training, that sort of thing, as well as looking at demand, but it's not in this entire region. So that program has got some traction, and so they're looking at it right now. Dr. Hammond says that enrollment might look like we might be up a little bit. It's kind of early to tell, but in looking at, if you look at the enrollment with the Laramie High School and what we're doing with the University of Wyoming, as well as what we're doing at the Albany County campus. And so very preliminary, but at least we're holding our own. And, on that front, the strategic plan, which we've been working on, started early last summer, should be in its final stages. In fact, maybe if we could talk about it at a future board meeting, it might be ready even at our November meeting if we have time, or if the trustees would like to hear on the strategic plan of the Albany County campus. So that's a possibility. Sure. And then October 31st on Halloween, Dr. Hammond has advised me that there's going to be like a faculty student connection day.
It's institution-wide, but it's the first time I think we really mobilized it there.
Okay, and mostly on target enrollment and scheduling and getting students to sign up for spring semester and get going on that. So those are some of the 4 items that I wanted to kind of bring out, and kind of on a footnote, a legislative footnote. Really interesting when Dr. Schaefer brought up that the university was going to do some things about surrounding states and so forth. But the legislature directed the city of Laramie and the University of Wyoming to take a look at 15th Street. It was a directive. City officials, you're supposed to get together with the university, decide whether or not 15th Street should be left open or closed. It's just kind of another interesting, I think.
It was repealed.
It was repealed. Well, they're looking at it because we've had several sessions. The city and the university have made a big, I shouldn't say, but we've had maybe 5 or 6 meetings, different task force, the trustees were involved, all over a footnote regarding this activity. And it doesn't sound like there's any interest at all to close 15th Street down. The city officials are saying from a utility, anyway, I'm kind of digressing, but it was kind of an interesting point of view. So,
remember.
It sounds like it's not going to happen.
It's
not going to happen, yeah.
Okay.
It just doesn't seem to be any interest in closing 15th Street down, but what the legislature did direct.
It's not going to happen, right?
No.
Okay. Perfect.
That's just
whatever.
News.
Tara, you have something you want to say about that?
Yeah, at least the discussion when the Senate was that was not appropriate as a footnote in the budget bill, and we struck it. How it's still there, I'm sure.
There just seems to be a lot to do with about nothing, but anyway, it's been making the news, and we have met several times now, and taken out city council meetings and trustee meetings regarding 15th Street.
Seems like a lot of time was wasted. Maybe.
Thank you. That concludes my report unless.
Or whatever. Thank you.
Kevin has anything to add to that?
Brady, anything?
No.
Nothing. Okay, thank you. Student ex officio trustee Derek.
With the student government ex officio report, we have set our SGA goals as required by our constitution. Our 2 yearly goals this year shall be to increase student involvement with student government and to work on rewriting our constitution for clarity and function.
Okay.
although typically we only set one goal a year. This year, we're feeling ambitious.
Okay.
The pantry is moving forward. We have it fully moved at the moment and operational, but we have not got it widely advertised yet. We are running food drives with the Bats School this month, and I'm not sure which school next month, but it is 1 month per school. And we have 2 business classes that will also be running food drives to help us. The bond support letter, I have talked with the person writing it in student government, and they said that they revised it and it should be done tomorrow, and we should be able to release it next week. And as far as the holiday gala, we have several eager senators waiting for it and anticipating volunteering there. And you're right, it is pretty hard to study hungry.
Yeah.
But that's all for my report.
Well, thank you. Any questions of Derek?
Madam Chair, so Derek, the gala that we put on every year, is that?
Yeah, there's the holiday gala, and the senators will be volunteering at the gala to, I believe, monitor children, watch the Polar Express with them, and keep things in line.
How cool. Wow.
That's great. Student Services has that this year, is that right? So you already got students lined up.
Oh, that's
So
great.
they had the children had fun last year in the private dining area where they set up. I just remember it looking like it snowed popcorn and everything. So that's great that the students are already thinking that and looking forward to that. That's really nice. Yeah.
So the gala is going to be here at the school again.
Yes.
Perfect. I think it's wonderful here. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Derek. And you don't have to be on all committees because we realize that you are here to study, learn, and graduate. So thank you for your input. I can't remember now, any new business? Have none. Next meeting will be November 8th, the day after election. And then obviously the next meeting will be December 6th. Is there any public comment? Is there any public comment? There being none, we will adjourn. Oh, may I have a motion for adjournment, please. Come on,
Move to
Joe.
adjourn.
Okay, second, please.
I'll second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone not in agreement? Meeting is dismissed. Sorry.